If there's any Victoria 3 experience which goes underplayed, it's that of the Personal Union Junior member. It's not because it's somehow a different experience than the rest of the game, but rather, there are only 4 personal unions in the game, one of which is Hanover, which is scripted to stop being a personal union very quickly into the game. And so, we shift our focus to Norway, which is actually a very interesting nation as of Charters of Commerce's release. There are 2 reasons for that. First, with the world market, we can now specialize in exporting and importing, so what resources Norway lacks, it can buy, and those in which it is abundant, it can sell. Second, most of Norway's fjord state modifiers have had a happy little mappy bonus tacked onto them, making Norway an extremely good choice for playing tall. Now that's all well and good for Norway's potential as a fun pick, but I want to do a little more than just sell fish to the world. I want to mess with an economic law that I very rarely use in Victoria 3, and that is command economy. Command economy is famously inefficient because of how it deletes money, but it does provide a hefty budget and some huge authority. Hilariously, the hardest part I found for getting command economy is how long it takes to get. You need a tier 4 society tech, and you need 2 things which don't often come in pairs. You need a strong trade union, which will actually support passing the law, and you need an authoritarian government. Specifically, autocracy, oligarchy, technocracy, or single-party state will do. The conundrum there is that the trade unions tend to gain power as they gain voting rights. For this reason, command economy can be very difficult to pass. However, I am making it my mission this run to mess around with command economy while also providing an interesting story for our little Norwegian subject. Unlike most of my Victoria 3 videos, I'm going into this run with a very particular goal, and so I will pursue it using safe scumming or exploits or cheese or whatever I need to do. Nothing too insane, but to give you an example, I'm going to have a lot of trouble passing command economy, and I am not afraid to reload a save file, adjust my authority to change how many days it takes to pass, and then roll a success chance again. If that turns you off, then sorry. The reason I'm doing it is because otherwise I'd probably never pass command economy. Paradox, please make vanguardists more common so that we can actually use this law without all this annoyance. But without further ado, Norway. Like a lot of minor powers, Norway is a nation with a very slow start. We have little construction and neither the army nor navy to make any sort of expansionist plays. What we do have as Norway though is fish. We have a whole lot of fish and whales which we can use to get some profits and standard of living going. As a member of the Swedish market, we can pretty easily steal population from them, and by using resource decrees combined with the North Sea fisheries state trait, we can have very high throughput fisheries to start the game. I'll eventually put those fisheries into a company, which will translate those profits into a healthy class of capitalists that can drive change in the nation. Norway starts the game with a very nice set of interest groups off the bat, to be honest. A whole bunch of reformers, and a pretty influential industrialist group. This is a great start because we could use our reformers to get cultural exclusion and primary school for kids eventually. Norway also begins with census suffrage, which is most of why their interest groups are so varied and strong. I'm immediately going for cultural exclusion in the hopes of attracting some migrants, since Norway has a pretty low population, and I should be able to get people employed quickly, which will shoot up my standard of living rapidly. In terms of getting people employed, it's all about the fish. I'm starting with just one construction sector, since I don't want to get too aggressive about spending, but we'll ramp that up as we get more tax income. After getting cultural exclusion, I went for public schools, and upon checking my state's demographics, I noticed we've already got a little Serbian minority growing. There'll be many more to come, I'm sure. I spent the next little while just browsing companies, and I noticed that there's no special companies for fishing as Norway. How sad. There are cool companies for electricity and ships, but nothing for fishing. But oh well. Basic fishing consortium it is, at least once I can found a company. That'll take a little while. Sorry if this is a whole lot of stuff happening all at once, but next I'll be getting protectionism, which is my generally preferred trade law. Finally, in March of 1839, I got to make my fishery consortium, which I unfortunately forgot to give a creative custom name. Perhaps I can make it up to you with the fact that the CEO's last name is Middlefart. Haha, fart. Anyway, the video's primary concern is the whole command economy thing, but it'll take time to get there. Nonetheless, I don't want to spend forever just describing my opening moves here, so I'll summarize the early Norwegian gameplay here as more or less just making fish and trade centers while passing some laws. Aside from fish and whale-oriented industries, I also started making some tools, which tend to perform well in any market, let alone the Swedish one, which tends to have a lot of mines. I've got protectionism passed in January of 1842, and I've got over £1.5 million of GDP, which is nice. I'm continuing to pass laws I like, with dedicated police next, while my tooling workshops make solid profits. I should add that this entire time, I've been damaging relations with Sweden in the hopes of getting enough liberty desire to become a protectorate. While we're a personal union, we can't start any plays, but once I get a protectorate status, you bet I'll be making some colonies off in Africa. Norway is pretty short on resources, and if we want to keep ourselves strong in this relationship with Sweden, we'll have to gain some power. In November of 1843, I gave my fishing company a whaling monopoly, which I'm hoping will help shoot profits even higher. The thing is that more profits for the company doesn't really do a ton for me, since I can't make a lot more construction without risking a debt spiral. I got my second company in February of 1845, and I went with the basic metal company. I know there's some pretty lame company picks, but honestly, Norway just doesn't have any interesting flavor companies. There's a couple of shipyard ones, but I don't care to make a bunch of ships really. There's also an electricity company, but imagine playing with electricity, right? Who wants that headache? I was looking into getting my autonomy increased, but looks like the Netherlands and America would defend Sweden, which doesn't bode well for me. Even Prussia is leaning towards supporting Sweden, and I definitely cannot defeat all that military power. Regardless, I might be able to attack Sweden at some point in such a way that no one will join the war. If Prussia and America are busy at the same time at some point, then I should be able to get a 1v1 with Sweden, which I can totally win. To make that happen, I'll need an army, so I got on that in October 1847, finally putting down a bunch of barracks. It didn't take long to get my barracks up and running, and you'd think it would be expensive, but I'm also making arms industries alongside this army, so I'm kind of just adding to my nation's economy by making an army. Looking at the numbers in June of 1849, I've got Sweden outnumbered now, but they still have too many friends who can trounce me. It seems like I'll have to make even more soldiers. At least, that was my thought until my army got strong enough that Sweden was willing to just grant me protectorate status. Look at that. With an obligation, I have a 97% chance to be granted protectorate status in January of 1852. And luckily for me, Sweden did grant it. Great, no need for war. At this point, being a subject has no real impact on me beyond the fact that Sweden, alongside anyone they grant investment rights to, can just buy all my industries out from under me, and that I can't go higher than minor power. It's time to make a navy and get into Africa, folks. My new king ended up being Harald Bernadotte, which I think is surprisingly sensible. This character isn't historical, but let's call him some far-off cousin of the Bernadottes that rule Sweden even today. His primary goal was to get a colonial institution going, and as an industrialist, Harald there is the perfect choice to achieve just that. Check it out, by the way, rare Austria-Hungary spotted in April of 1853. I don't know about you, but I rarely see Austria get the Hungary added to it like that. More importantly though, I got colonial exploitation in May of 1854, which means once I get quinine, we'll be colonizing Africa as soon as possible. While waiting for that, I'll be getting proportional taxation, which will increase my overall tax income while reducing the tax burden on my lower class pops. The really nice thing, especially about proportional taxation, is that by getting a dividend tax going, it means your company profits now directly translate to more income. It just makes the game feel a lot more responsive, in the sense that high profits on a building directly translate to more money for the government. Unfortunately, I needed to use a tax cut to increase my success chance, so for a little while the budget will be deeply negative. I got my new tax law in December of 1856, and I've also got 32 ships by this point. My army and navy are strong enough that I feel quite confident moving into Africa now, and I do indeed need to make some moves because my budget is quite negative and my loans will start piling up rather quickly. Unfortunately, Benin is protected by France, which makes invading them a bit scary. Instead, I'll target Sindh, whose plantations will be a welcome addition to my otherwise very low arable land nation. I landed there in March of 1859, winning the war with ease and acquiring my first overseas state. Although my army is quite effective, it is also quite expensive, which makes using it very painful and unsustainable. To help fix this problem, I decided to just raise taxes. Sometimes you do what you gotta do, and considering how high my standard of living is, I think my people can handle it. It should be noted as well that I didn't notice the fact that Sweden joined the Prussian power bloc in September of 1859, which is pretty huge for my potential migration, as well as for my economy. I now have access to the immense consumer demand of Germany, as well as their resources. Because of how small my economy is, I'm unlikely to have much influence on the German market, but that's okay. I can still benefit from this, although it hurts how much Germany will be buying up my buildings since they got investment rights with Sweden. In terms of what's in the power block, we've got internal trade, police coordination, militarized industry, and transportation infrastructure, which are okay, I guess. You can see the effect of all this German money buying up my stuff just by looking at Sindh, by the way. I'm starting up an opium industry in September of 1861 here, and we can see all these plantations have yellow ownership, which indicates foreign owners. Nonetheless, I at least get to increase my GDP and make money on taxes despite not owning the buildings, which means that letting the Germans and Swedes own some of my buildings isn't so bad. The investment pool is just piling up anyway. I put my focus on further expansion instead of worrying about ownership and invaded Benin, which was finally no longer protected by France. Sokoto joined the war, so I'm going to make them a protectorate because they have a lot of stuff that I can use to supply the German market. Given my pretty large military by this point, it was quite an easy war. However, we see again the immense cost of using this army. Definitely not a force I can throw around willy-nilly, meaning I'll have to make whatever conquests I do a little more meaningful. I say that, but I'm now going to invade Japan. Why did I attack Japan for Kyushu and money? Honestly, I recorded this a couple weeks ago, and I'm only now writing the script, and I really don't know why I did this. I think for silk, or for coal maybe, I called in the Netherlands to help me out, and they easily defeated Japan. Despite their large army, their units just aren't nearly as good as my lancers and line infantry. Thanks to Japan's payments, my budget is now quite healthy, and I've got over 20 million GDP. My Norwegian empire is getting pretty good, and I could try to break free from Sweden, but I kind of really enjoy being in the German market, so I'm cool with it. Using those Japanese reparations, I managed to escape my debt in June of 1867, and with that, it's time to expand in construction and go hard. You can see here, as of April of 1868, I've got 160 construction points, which is pretty damn good, and I've got over 30 million pounds in the investment pool, which are very slowly draining. It'll be very nice to get that money invested into actually making buildings. Now this is where I want to skip a bit of time, because yeah, all I'm doing is building stuff like opium, coffee, coal, iron, whatever. Basically anything which is in high demand among the Germans. Alongside that, I've ballooned my army up to over 100 battalions by 1872, and I've got a solid gold reserve with a pretty good construction sector. Nonetheless, I'm pretty sure I can't beat the United States and Sweden combined. Instead, I'm just going to start passing Council Republic. We don't need to get freedom in order to use command economy anyways. Now, looking at the success and stall chance, you might think that there's absolutely no way this law will ever pass, and you're more or less correct. I mentioned earlier that for the purpose of this playthrough, I'm not above safe scumming to get my laws to pass, and I'm holding to that. That being said, I somehow lucked out on the first check with Council Republic and got to the next stage immediately. That's pretty cool. My alternative idea here is to allow the Civil War to fire and rely on Sweden and Germany to help me put down the rebellion, so either this passes by pure luck, or I fight a civil war essentially. The Civil War route ended up being the way of things, and I called in the Netherlands to help me out, which, when combined with my already huge army and Sweden's army, should be an easy win. That is especially true given the rebellion happened in Benin of all places. Revolutions don't make much sense to me sometimes in Victoria 3, because this is an absolutist revolt, so it's presumably all the nobles and capitalists and stuff who don't want to see their power eroded. And yet it would end up being the colonials overseas who have the most to gain from a proletarian revolution that have risen up. The Civil War came to an end in June of 1875, and it took so long because Spain got involved and made my revolting enemy a subject, so we had to wait for Spain to capitulate. A bit annoying, but nothing to worry about, of course. Even with the Civil War over, I still have quite a low chance to pass Council Republic, mostly because the industrialists didn't join the Civil War, meaning their clout is still huge. Nonetheless, I won't simply be waiting around. I went for a war to protectorate Denmark, just to make for better market borders. Right now, Denmark isn't in the German market, so there's just this weird gap between us. Denmark backed down with a whimper, and I started to get a little worried about the budget, but not to worry, we'll soon be embracing communism, I suppose. Interesting note about interest payments and debt in Victoria 3. You take out loans from the cash reserves of your buildings in Victoria 3. At least, your debt cap used to be calculated mostly by your cash reserves, but that was changed at one point to be more about GDP. However, the interest that you pay actually does go to the owners of the buildings to which you owe the debt. In Victoria 3, you can only owe money to your own people. You can't take on foreign loans, which is a shame, but whatever. Now, here's something I think communism should do. When a building is collectivized or nationalized, why the hell do I still owe debt to it? I'm just saying that if, Johann's tool workshop or whatever is run by some capitalist named, Johann, and then it is collectivized by the workers or nationalized by the government, I sincerely doubt the workers or government will then also take on the debts that they are owed by the government. I get the feeling the new socialist tool syndicate is going to, in essence, be a new entity, and the debt owed to Johann's tool workshop would be written off, but whatever. The reason I bring this up is that it would make it much more attractive to go communist in this game if collectivization meant a wipe of all debt that is owed to those industries. Command economy sort of simulates something like this, where with command economy, all money sitting in the investment pool is converted into gold reserves, which simulates the end of the private economy. I like that a lot. Maybe collectivization should take the cash reserves on the building and put them in the government budget. I don't know. In general, communism in this game is horribly weak compared to capitalism, although command economy isn't too bad, which I'll be happy to show off soon. It took a long time, but by April of 1881, yes, I've skipped over a few years, but nothing really happened, don't worry, I have become a Council Republic. I got very close to failing to pass the law a couple times, but I also got incredibly lucky at times. I did not have to save scum this part at all, which was nice. Now, I can't make the fatal mistake of going for cooperative ownership at this point, because then the only way to get command economy would be to get back off of cooperative ownership and then go to command economy, or hope to God for a vanguardist interest group, which is exceedingly rare in current patch Victoria 3. To get command economy, I'll need central planning technology, which I don't have yet, and I'll need to get rid of voting. The easiest law to go for here is oligarchy, although I'd prefer like technocracy, but I'll take oligarchy, it is what it is. I probably could have gotten central planning much earlier if I had been making universities, but I kind of just entirely forgot about that, so I queued up a bunch of unis that'll help me get the text sooner. After getting about 25 down, it'll just take me 3 years as of August of 1883 to get central planning, which isn't super long for sure. I'm just about to get oligarchy at this point, so even if I had central planning earlier, it's not like I'd have been able to pass it right away anyway. The law passed in December 1883, and now I'm actually thinking of going for corporate state because it's kind of just better than council republic. Now, you'll have to indulge me here, but I love corporate state in Victoria 3 for its mechanics, but I hate it for what it's supposed to represent historically. A corporate state is not a corporatocracy, which is what I think Victoria 3 thinks it is. Getting an extra company slot is of course amazing, but corporate states are, in essence, governments which centralize power into the nation. It's the famous third way with regards to labor relations, in the sense that in capitalism, workers and corporations individually bargain their wages. In socialism, workers do away with corporations entirely and own their workplaces directly, and in a corporate state, the government mediates worker-corporate relations. A way to relate this to modern equivalents is essentially negotiating your own wage, working with a union, and the government negotiating your wage for you. Famous corporate states are the classics, Fascist Italy, Nazi Germany, and less famously, Portugal's Estado Novo, and for modern examples, albeit not perfect ones, one could look to Japan or Korea, but Wikipedia tells me those two are more controversial with regards to their definition as corporate states. You want to know what I think would be an amazing power for a corporate state? The ability to manually set wages in buildings. Dude, wouldn't that be really cool? It would reflect the historical role of corporate states quite well and give an interesting choice as the player. Higher wages means less investment pool because lower profits, but lower wages means less SOL and by extension less consumption in your market. Anyway, rant over, sorry, I just think corporate state is a horrible misunderstanding of history in Victoria 3. Because everyone in my nation except the trade unions hates communism, it's really easy for me to pass corporate state, which I do in November 1885. My government is now a fascist state and I've got this cool new flag. Very cool. I can now begin my work to pass command economy and I'm feeling good so far. The budget is negative, but not unrecoverably so. I've got almost 60 million GDP and rising. I'm taking in migrants from Germany and just generally prospering. It really isn't so bad at all to be in the German sphere of influence, is it? There's just one problem which I already know is coming. I can't nationalize buildings which are owned by nations that are either my overlord or with whom I have investment rights. Anyone that Sweden grants investment rights to also gets investment rights with me. That means that once I get command economy, I won't be able to instantly nationalize most of my nation's buildings. That means that although it will hurt, I must at least temporarily gain independence. I want to get a sense of how bad it'll be, so I declared war on Sweden for a humiliation. I'm not looking for independence yet, until I actually get command economy, but I'd like to conquer some Swedish states just to get a little more power and see what my market is actually missing. Once the war broke out, it was immediately clear that I am in fact missing pretty much everything. I've got grain shortages, paper shortages, artillery shortages, and so on, but at least I'll be conquering most of Sweden in this war, which I did with ease. Upon the war ending, I re-entered the German market and my economy rebounced. I went from 56 million pounds of GDP up to 80 million within just a few months of returning to the market, although my budget was irreparably harmed, mostly by the new loans I took on during this time of immense deficit. By April of 1889, I'm on the last phase of command economy and I'm getting some stalls, unfortunately. By April of the following year, I got yet another stall that cratered my chance of passing the law, and I decided to reload a save. Save scumming in Victoria 3 is complex, as the outcome of a law pass is actually determined in the game the moment you begin the phase. It's based on which day the phase triggers on, so I need to change on what day the phase progresses. I can change the amount of time it takes to get through a phase by either changing my legitimacy or authority, since excess authority increases how quickly a phase progresses. So, I'm turning off a bunch of decrees to increase my authority and then seeing if the handful of days makes a difference to the outcome of the phase. Instead of getting a minus 15% success chance stall, I got a public address goes awry event, which isn't quite as bad, so I went with it. It was on the next phase, in April of 1891, that I did a lot of save scumming, as I just kept getting horrible stalls. I kept reloading until I got a positive debate event in September of 1891, which gave me 10% more of success. Next phase, I got a crooked connections, which is fine. Then, on the next phase, I got a huge stall, and I ended up failing to pass the law. That won't do. I'm not waiting around forever to pass this law, as I want to experience the command economy now. I did more and more reloading, yada yada, until I got the right date to get a success in February of 1892. Boom, command economy is here. You may also have noticed my GDP has skyrocketed during the past couple years, and that's mostly because I once again pumped up my construction, and I've also been getting lots of investments from the Germans. My standard of living is also soaring, which is presumably thanks to more and more of my nation becoming gainfully employed. Regardless, we did it. We've got command economy, and all it took was a lot of save scumming. The Norwegian Revolution is complete. All that remains is to reclaim the economy from the foreign actors that have stolen it. Right off the bat, I can nationalize a lot of buildings that aren't owned by Germany or Sweden. Here's something fun about foreign investment. The AI rightfully enjoys using investment rights, which creates regional HQs in the nations they invest with. Regional HQ buildings are not considered foreign, and that means I can nationalize them even if the nation they're from has investment rights with me and it won't even harm relations. That's wonderful, because it means I can nationalize well over 700 buildings in total. The only thing is, it's a huge pain to do this because the buildings registry won't let me nationalize them from the menu without also nationalizing all of my company's buildings. I want to keep my companies around, but I want to get rid of the foreign companies. So to do that, I've got to click on the regional HQ and manually get through all those buildings. An annoyance for sure. One massive, gigantic, horrible downside of command economy is that you cannot ever privatize anything, and that means I can't sell any businesses to my companies. My companies, whatever size they are now, are as big as they'll ever get at this point, unless I change economic laws again. That's because command economy also disables the investment pool entirely, so the companies can't build anything themselves, let alone buy them from me.
Quick interjection here in post. I didn't notice that command economy specifically says it allows investment pool only for companies, so companies can indeed still expand. However, they can only use 10% of the construction sectors of the nation, and it still stands that you can't privatize, so they can't buy your buildings off of you. This means that companies are still immensely hampered by command economy, and therefore my point still stands with regards to command economy and its relation to companies, but it's only maybe 90% as apocalyptically bad as I previously thought. Since Charters of Commerce's release, companies are now a huge part of the fun of the game in my opinion. That means that command economy kinda just goes entirely against that aspect of the game, which is fine. I think that a game where you don't use companies is completely acceptable, but it'll be nice to use command economy when one day there's some kind of DLC that expands communist mechanics. We've got our capitalist DLC, now where's the communist DLC paradox, and maybe a corporatist DLC too. Regardless of all that, command economy is indeed quite good, as I'm making a huge budget now. I can get my debt paid off pretty fast like this, and as my debt gets paid off, I'll make even more money because I'll be paying less interest, and my government dividend efficiency will increase. Debt decreases government dividends across the board, so we'd like to fix that soon. Speaking of government dividends, that's the downside of command economy. Privately owned businesses, and especially company-owned buildings, have two distinct advantages over government-owned ones. They don't get a throughput negative, and they don't delete money. When I say delete money, what I'm referring to is the fact that if your government dividend efficiency is, let's say, 60%, that means the other 40% of the money you make is simply vaporized. With a privately held building, those dividends are completely dispersed as income for capitalists, which will send that income either to the investment pool or to the purchasing of consumer goods. The money is never wasted, unless their SOL is at 99, at which point they can't buy any more goods, so the excess money is vaporized, but 99 SOL is pretty rare. This means that although the government here has way more access to the money of the nation, it is deleting a pretty significant portion of it. Nonetheless, there is a strong argument to be made that you, the player, can better use that money if it's in your budget than if it exists as a bunch of buy orders for your upper class. Ultimately, since it's deleting so much money, it'll never be able to create as much actual GDP, assuming that you're using your investment pool to its fullest potential, but it's a nice shortcut to having to manage your economy so closely. With command economy, as long as most of your buildings are profitable, you'll never have to worry about budget again. I could massively expand the construction industry by this point since I've got so much surplus budget, but being in debt is bad for government dividends, so instead, I'll let the surplus ride until I've got some gold reserves, then go ahead and ramp up the construction. To give you an idea of how much is being built in my nation by foreigners, by the way, I conquered Punjab and immediately wanted to get to building up some farming there since it's got such a nice throughput bonus. I looked at the foreign queue, and you can see here in September 1893 just how much the Americans, Germans, and Swedes are building. Since I no longer care for my investment pool, I'm much less irked to watch them invest, but in theory, the stuff they're building is robbing me of some government dividends, I suppose. Remember when I mentioned non-expanding construction until I was out of debt? Well, turns out that me, while playing this game, didn't think of that and just built up over 800 construction anyway. I think this was because I wasn't planning on playing much longer, but I did indeed end up playing more as I decided to make the ultimate Norwegian fascist state. This chapter is called Nationalization versus Collectivization, and that's because I'm about to abandon command economy despite just getting it. To me, this playthrough is something of a test of the less common economic models in the game, and I want to try really soaring my SOL. The problem is that I'm going to make a discovery about collectivization that really hurts my soul pretty soon. In November of 1894, I got to work on establishing the single-party state after having gotten women in the workforce. I'm doing a single-party state to help with the fascism roleplay, but it's also just kind of the best governance system in the game because of the huge authority bonus while preserving parties and elections.
I like to imagine this grand announcement from the Norwegian president about how the oligarchy was a necessity to bring glory to the nation, and now it's time to reopen elections. Any party can try to win, but then the government just massively suppresses anything else that isn't them, and therefore always wins. It's a real hellscape of a reality. I got single-party state in April of 1897, and before jumping to cooperative ownership, I got to work on graduated taxation. That tax law will work wonders for a nation with mostly dividend-earning workers, since it taxes dividends more than income. The new tax law passed in August of 1898, and with that, my budget is actually almost neutral despite all the debt and construction I've got going. I've got over 200 million GDP before 1900 as a minor power, which I think is pretty good, and my SOL is over 17. Not bad at all. I'm going to pass a few more small laws before getting cooperative ownership. First, workers' protections, which I'm going to use to increase wages. After that, multiculturalism to get all the migrants ever. I'm going to make the ultimate Norwegian paradise. You might even call it Valhalla. And once we collectivize, migrants from around the world will come flooding in to experience the power of actually owning the businesses they work at. Now I'm going to go for cooperative ownership, as of September of 1905. In the couple of years that passed, I essentially just kept building whatever was profitable, and you'll notice that my budget has immensely improved. That's because the Germans really do provide a huge market for me, and I can sell my goods for huge profits there, and those profits directly translate into money for the government. I've got over 300 million pounds of GDP, but the SOL has remained somewhat stagnant. Looking at my budget, almost half of my income is government dividends, and this is where collectivization gets scary. So, in theory, with collective ownership, it's actually quite possible to just not let the buildings collectivize. Just don't click privatize and the local workers can't buy the buildings from you. Amazing, right? Well, allow me to skip ahead to March 1907, where we now have cooperative ownership. First off, all government dividends go to the investment pool with cooperative ownership, so those government dividends, whether I allow my buildings to get bought or not, are gone. You can see that reflected in my now horrid government budget. There's something much worse about this though, and that's that I need to set my buildings to privatize for my workers to be able to buy them. Unfortunately, by doing that, which I foolishly did, all the foreign investors that have been buying my stuff already just came in and bought them up first. Now I've got a gigantic cash reserve from all my buildings selling, but my budget is dead and my workers aren't even in charge of the buildings, and worse even, I have basically no investment pool generation because I have neither capitalists nor government buildings anymore. In better news, I'm the #1 GDP while still being a minor power subject. That's pretty crazy. Remember that migration spoke of before, by the way? Well, as of December of 1908, I've got over 14 million people in eastern Norway, of whom only 3.7 million are Norwegians. If we combine the North and South Germans, we have more Germans in total there. Western Norway tells a similar story, although it's got Han instead of South German people. Northern Norway has a plurality of North Germans with a sizable Norwegian and Sindhi community. Even our Swedish territories like Skåne are taking in migrants. Skåne has almost 1 million Japanese folks, and even Benin of all places has accrued a sizable set of Japanese settlers. I continued to play through until around 1910, as my economy stagnated and I more or less peaked while staring down the inevitable economic collapse of my nation. There's probably a way to fix things, but nationalization really is the way to go, and I can't nationalize anything so long as my overlord has investment rights, so I'm going to try going for independence, but the moment my market is separated from Germany, everything collapses. I do end up winning the war, forming a power bloc, and bankrupting, but I can't possibly save this nation. I let time pass as I once again spiral towards death and my GDP and SOL plummet. As one last hurrah, I decided to dismantle all my industries just for the fun of it. In theory, there is a way to save this, by deleting the right industries to create the right balance of profits that could create an actual government budget, but my god, I am not looking to deal with that. One thing I'm considering is sending this in to One Proud Bavarian as a disaster save to see if he wants to try and figure out a solution. Wouldn't that be a fun challenge for him? Let me know what you think in the comments. Either way, it was weirdly cathartic to then just destroy all my buildings and watch the GDP shrink back to under 50 million. Rather hilariously, after doing that and getting rid of most of my army, my budget did go positive and I could try and rebuild what was lost, but nah, I'm done. I did actually go back and reload a save from before I collectivized to see if maybe I could try avoiding collectivizing until I was independent so that I could actually let the workers take all the buildings. But then, while playing through that, I ended up getting war declared on me by France, and I was just super ready to beat them, one-on-one. But I forgot that because Sweden didn't protect me, I just immediately went free when the war began. Once that happened, my GDP immediately sunk to less than 100 million and my market was screwed, and my debt cap shrunk enough that I went into default immediately. Yeah, I'm good then. Not looking to make this playthrough take even longer than it already has. In conclusion, I'll admit that I didn't really give cooperative ownership a fair shake, but I'll tell you now that just off of what its theoretical usage is, it's not very good, even compared to command economy. Command economy, while inefficient, is actually not bad, since it lets you control your economy much more and put to use the profits that your nation is making. In terms of effective use cases, you'll want to get command economy if a significant portion of your nation's industry is foreign owned, or if you have a lot of government expenses. A time where command economy is really bad is if you depend on the investment pool to do most of your building. You could suddenly see your ability to get new buildings down significantly weakened if you no longer have access to an investment pool. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the rise and fall of this glorious Norwegian empire. We started with fish and whales but turned into something far greater, until of course it collapsed into rubble, as all fascist states eventually do. Looking forward to expansions on communist and fascist governance in future Victoria 3 updates, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for your time.